Remember, brackets with no sign between them is multiply. And before we can multiply these together, we need to worry about our restrictions. So for this x, it's only one x. If it's a positive value, we can square root it. If it's a negative, we can't. So x has to be greater than or equal to 0. If we look at this one, if it's, again, it's a 1x. So we're looking at if it's positive, we're good. If it's negative, we can't. So it would also be ax is greater than or equal to 0. Recall that with our restrictions, we are looking at needing to have one that meets the requirements of everything. In this case, they're both exactly the same, so our overall restriction is x has to be greater than or equal to 0. So there's our restriction. So there's our first piece. Now, as we go to do this, remember everybody in the first bracket needs to multiply everybody in the second. So these two guys are going to multiply together. That means I'm going to have 2 square root x times 5. And these two are going to multiply together. Positive times a negative is a negative. 2 square root x times 3 square root x. And that takes care of our 2 square root x. We now need to multiply everybody by the 3. So these two are going to need to multiply together. Positive times a positive is a positive. 3 times 5. And these two are going to need to multiply together. Positive times a negative is a negative. 3 times 3 square root x. So there we go. At this stage now, we're going to go through and multiply. Remember, no radical behind a number means that number is going to need to multiply with the coefficient. So we are looking at 5 times 2, which is 10, square root x, minus 2 times 3 is 6, x times x is x squared, plus 3 times 5 is 15, minus, no radical with this, so it multiplies with the coefficient. 3 times 3 is 9, square root x. So, we can see some like terms already. This one here and this one here look like terms. Question is what does this one become? And can we combine it with any of the others? So let's simplify that one. If we move off to the side, 6 square root x squared is the same as 6 square root x times x. And x times x, there's 2 of them under there. So they get to be circled, they get to move out. There is nothing left behind, so we are left with 6x as our simplified answer for that. So if we go back to what we had, we now have 10 square root x minus, we figured out this was 6x, plus 15 minus 9 square root x. Looking for like terms, remember the numbers under the radical sign have to be exactly the same. So these two can be combined. These two, neither of them have radical signs. However, this one has an x, this one does not. So these two are not like terms, they cannot be combined. As we go to do this, 10 minus 9 is 1, square root x, minus 6x, plus 15. X has to be greater than or equal to 0. There is our final answer. As we go to look at this dividing question, first thing we need is our restrictions. Negative under the square root sign will not work, and if we have 3 as our exponent, that would be 3 negatives. Can't do that, so x has to be greater than or equal to 0 for the top. In the bottom, we have only 1x. Positive x will work. Negative 1 will not. However, we can also not have 0 in the denominator. So we are looking at x has to be greater than or equal, greater than 0, not equal to 0. So as we go to look at this, that would mean that our overall restriction is the one that is most restrictive. And most restrictive would be the one that does not include the 0. So our overall restriction is x has to be greater than 0. So there's our overall restriction. And now, as we go to do our question, remember that in order for it to divide out, when we have multiple pieces in the numerator and the denominator, it has to divide out of everybody. So if we look at our coefficients, we can divide everybody by 2. So we're going to divide everybody by 2 as far as the coefficients go. So divide everybody by 2. Under the radical signs, these guys could both divide x's, but this one can't. So we're not able to do that. So as we go to look at our question, we now have 6 divided by 2 is 3, square root 5, minus 2 divided by 2 is 1, square root of 24x cubed, all divided by 2 divided by 2 is 1, square root of x. So there we have our division has happened. Recall we do not like radicals in the denominator, which means we need to rationalize. And rationalize would be multiply the top and the bottom by the square root of x. Now, as we go to multiply the top, what happens here is this has to multiply both items in the numerator, which means it's as if there's a invisible set of brackets around that numerator as we go to multiply. So 3 times 1 is 3, 5 times x is 5x, negative times a positive is a negative, 24 times 1 is 24, x cubed times x, remember this is 1, so x, 3 plus 1 is 4, all divided by x times x is x squared. Alright, so we've now multiplied the top and the bottom. Next step would be to simplify those radicals, see if we can make any of them smaller. So taking a look at 24 off to the side, we have 24 is 4 times 6, 4 is 2 times 2, 6 is 2 times 3. So if I look at this first radical, that's a prime number, that's 1x, it's not going to simplify. However, instead of 24, I can write 3 2's and a 3. And instead of x to the 4th, I can write in 4 x's. All underneath one great big radical sign. In the denominator, x squared would be the same as x times x. So, first term we said doesn't change. Second one, we're looking for groups of 2 that are the same. So these two 2's can go together. This 2 has nobody to go with. This 3 has nobody to go with. These two 2's can go together. These two 2's can go together. So that as we go to deal with this, these 2's come out, become a single 2 on the outside. These 2 become a single x. Those 2 become a single x. And underneath my radical sign, I have 2 times 3. In the denominator, again, index is 2, so 2 of the same. These guys get to move out. And there is nobody left under the radical sign. Let's multiply anything that can be multiplied back together, and then we can see if we can combine terms or simplify. So we have 3 square root 5x minus 2. X times x is x squared. 2 times 3 is 6, all over x. So we've now multiplied everybody back together that were just single multiplies. These two x's cannot be simplified because one's under a radical sign, one isn't. These two, although these guys can simplify on the coefficient, there is no x on this coefficient to simplify. So if we add in our restriction, x has to be greater than 0. So greater than 0. That would be our final answer.